Jonathan,
Vinny, what's up, man?
just living my best life.
Really?
Gotta, yeah, it's officially fall out here in Minnesota. It's hit the 60s, no more humidity during the day. So I've got a sweater on for the first time in like months.
Nice,
I see
nice,
you
nice.
wearing a t-shirt, so I'm,
I
I'm a little bummed about that.
I am. It's perennially Daffy Duck, perennially nice weather here in California.
Hey, I miss
Um,
those days.
just got back from the dog park. And it's funny that we're talking here to talk about, using anxiety as an asset. You
Yeah.
obviously very accomplished professional, management consultant, work with executives and helping companies optimize, strategize, monetize. You're a new father, husband, right? And all those things are great in and of themselves, but they also come with a load, a burden, right? Which we can
Mm-hmm.
also label as anxiety. And that's what we're here to talk about. You're also a blogger as well, and now podcast host for the Anxiety Asset.
Yes.
And that's why
Yeah.
it's great to talk with you, because here I created the I Wish I Knew podcast to help folks, to help share the same information that I have now that I wish that I had when I was younger. And dealing with anxiety is one of those things. Definitely. I realize that I, by default, think that I have a higher form of anxiety than most just by default, by nature. And I'll tell you a story. When I was a kid, my sister, she's 2 years older. Um, my dad used to throw us both up into the air, like, hold us up and throw us maybe 6 feet, 6 inches to a foot in the air.
6 feet.
6 feet, not 6 feet.
That would cause some anxiety for me too.
Launching the kids. Maybe 6 inches to a foot in the air. And her response would be, laughter, giggling, and mine to the exact same stimuli would be tension,
Yeah.
freezing up, right? And so, um, understanding this about myself has been important along my journey, because anxiety has a direct impact on my mind, my state of mind, impacts your performance, and it impacts your overall quality of life. And I want to have a higher quality of life. I want everyone else to have a high quality of life as well. So, how this even relates, even just getting a dog over the last year, has helped me with some of this anxiety. And
Hmm.
just being greeted in the morning. Gratitude is one of those things that I think about, um, that is not just for me anecdotally, but has clinically been proven to be something that is really powerful for um, increasing one's quality of life, and the health benefits are really real. And where you focus on, where your mind focuses, you end up fostering and getting more of that. So that's why I try and start my days with gratitude. And it's super easy because the dog comes in and jumps on the bed, you know, licks me, it's awesome, right? The endorphin release and all that stuff. So want to dive in and talk more about anxiety, some of the things and your approach and how you even made anxiety an asset. But before we do that, I think it may be helpful to just start with your story, obviously, where you are now and what inspired you to even launch Anxiety Asset.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to share the story. And it actually is a good segue from some of the things that I was reflecting on your story on, which is a great story. I've been, really impressed and see you as one of my role models in terms of what you're doing for yourself in your career, which is really impressive. As an accomplished executive at now various high tech companies over the years, I've learned a lot from you. In fact, was one of my inspirations for starting this. So I really want to say first, thank you, as you've been part of my story. So as part of that story, um, I never knew I had anxiety. In fact, it's one of those things I wish I knew. I've when I look back to think about when were the origins of when I had anxiety, it's one of those things. It's kind of like puberty. Like you never know when it actually hit, but it hit, and you're like, oh wow, things are different, right? With anxiety, similar. I remember the first time I really felt anxiety. It was as I was going into adulthood, and I've had several moments where it was formalized but not quite crystallized in my life. There were a couple of stories in the workplace and also in the classroom, which helped elevate my level of anxiety, which exacerbated my level of anxiety rather. And in fact, where, one example, stalling in speeches in the classroom setting twice and not being able to accomplish that very feat, especially for me as a high performing academic student. 4.41 GPA in high school, went to the number one public university in the US, arguably the world, and not being able to give a dang speech that 3 minutes was really overrunning my life. And I stalled in the middle of the first one. I had some friends in that classroom. It felt really, really overwhelming. And that was with a lot of prep. I thought maybe the next time I'll do even more prep and even more planning. And I stalled again. And that connects me again to what you were reflecting on, that what we were talking actually before we started recording, something that helps with your anxiety is planning and preparing.
Yes.
I think for me, that is also, there's also a limit to how much planning and preparing I can and should do. And I know when the second time I stalled my speech in this classroom setting to potentially keep my high grades up at my university, I stalled again. And I think the second time wasn't anxiety; it was probably both anxiety and over preparedness. And so, taking away that, like, that's my origin with anxiety is primarily workplace now, because I am fully a professional now. Been in the consulting space for quite some time, but certainly can reflect back to classroom setting, high school, college, where I've had those moments of doubt, worry, fear, sweat coming down the back of my shirt, drenched almost.
I know that feeling, man.
Clenching up, right? Lots of those symptoms, exacerbating, sometimes even palpitations in the heart, right? Physical manifestations, mental manifestations, extremely overwhelming.
I feel it. I I know that personally.
Yeah.
And I would say this. I want to make it clear that I still feel anxiety. I still deal with it. It's something that I don't want anyone to think that because I'm recording this episode that it's something that I've mastered. One of the things that I'll tell you, a tool that I receive is this a phrase from a friend, and it's "do it scared."
Mm.
And so when you think about what the definition, I guess, of anxiety is, it really is a experience, your body feeling an emotional response to some sort of angst, some sort of fear.
Mm.
Right? You're anxious, you're fearful, you're overwhelmed with these emotions about a outcome that isn't real. Right? It has not happened yet, but your mind is treating it as if it is, and that's what I realized, that faith and fear are both the same thing. One is just believing in the positive outcome, and another one is believing in a negative outcome. And so from that perspective, it's like, okay, I do have a choice. And if where my focus goes, my energy flows, how do I think about the positive outcomes that can occur in doing something? But also understanding I'm never going to get to 100% because of how our bodies just maybe chemically, evolutionarily, we will always have, these responses and certain stimuli, and that it's okay to feel that anxiety and move past it and just continue to do it scared, as my friend, told me. So
You've got, an impressive background, someone to look at your resume and all that you're doing in your free time too, as an investor and whatnot. Like, from the outside looking in, I could podcaster, I would perceive you to be not only not anxious, but someone that has got their stuff together, and is just doing really well for themselves. Like, how do you, when you've told people that you had anxiety, how do people react? Do you share that openly? You're sharing it on this podcast, but what about more to your network, and what are some reactions, and how do you kind of manage that process for yourself?
You know what? I came up to some research that the power of being your authentic self is a real power. And I had a boss who told me about this, and he was a very much himself, owned who he was, and was unapologetically himself, which isn't what you always see in corporate America, right? I think there's folks who have the accepted, uh, you know, sort of image that they give off and a perspective that they want people to continue to have of them. And it's a very sanitized version and crafted version for
Mm-hmm.
that. And that is to be understood, right? But there's a certain power when you see someone who's like, wow, this guy says what he thinks, or this person is willing to dress a way that shows that they're confident enough in themselves and their capabilities that they don't care about these other superficial ways of fitting in to try and attempt to appease people. And that is powerful. And
Mm-hmm.
in trying to understand more about, this person's journey and how they got there, and talking to them, it realized that a lot of anxiety can come from putting on a facade. And this research was, I think it's from Harvard Business Review, showed that the best way to actually interview is to truly be yourself because of the cognitive uh, consumption, like literally the brain processing, trying to think about how I translate how I would normally say something into this way that I think that you want to hear. It actually takes up processing power in our brains, which leads to more stress, which leads to underperformance. So it said the best way to actually interview is truly to be to yourself. And here's the reason why. And it was backed up, by a lot of neuroscience stuff. I'll try and find the article and put it in the link here for the listeners to check out. But this is one of those things of like, okay, if anxiety is this fear, so in this scenario, it's me being fearful of being judged a certain way, being perceived a certain way. These are all insecurities that could be contributing to these things, right? I'm creating this anxiety by having this belief that I have to act or say things in a certain way in order to be accepted. And that is a form of tension that I created with myself internally that isn't beneficial and doesn't have to last, right? But it's only through having those examples and doing that self-reflection and understanding those things that you can even begin to address that.
Yeah, and it's certainly a journey. I can reflect on that and resonate with that. That it's that self-reflection is really key to raise awareness. One, for we're exchanging mantras to keep top of mind. Do it fearful. I love that one. Another one
Do it scared. Do it
do it
scared.
scared rather. The one that comes to mind for me is allow yourself to feel anxious.
Yeah.
I think, and that's something that I've listened to an author and speaker that I've recently interviewed for my podcast, and that was the quote that I took away from it. I think a misnomer I wish your listeners will be aware of going forward is that anxiety isn't something that I've learned to eliminate. I initially thought it's something that, okay, now that I've diagnosed myself or I've seen a clinical provider, you have anxiety, you check the boxes on anxiety. What I wanted to do was think of the two options: either medically prescribed, which helps, ultimately remove the anxiety, or through processes in my life of revising myself and thinking of how I can eliminate anxiety. Fast forward 3 years of trying to eliminate anxiety, I reached the conclusion that I shouldn't be trying to remove anxiety from my life, but instead coexist with it and make not anxiety my liability, but anxiety an asset for myself. And I think that's a key learning that I hope anyone can take away from this conversation, is that anxiety is not something that one should look to remove. It's something that that there are some that folks that have low to moderate levels of anxiety. In fact, in the US, we've got 40 million people over the age of 18. That's almost 15-20% of people that have anxiety. That's a large number. And so making anxiety is very natural. It's not something that we need to look to eliminate. For those that have more higher level of anxiety, certainly can be debilitating. And I've had that at times for myself personally. And I know what that's like. For those in that low to moderate category, aspiring to make anxiety your asset, taking advantage of those fight or flight instincts, which is where it all originates from. Feel free to Google that and learn more on where the origins of anxiety are, biologically speaking. By understanding more ourselves, you might be able to save yourself 3 years of trying to eliminate anxiety from your life.
Yeah, totally. I think you hit the nail on the head. The chemical look part of it, the medical. I'm not a medical doctor, won't talk about those things, but if that is an option that you need to explore, you should.
Yes.
But also for me, environment is one of those things. Having a clean, I feel in control. I feel proactive when I walk into my office area and everything's in order. Right.
Mm,
So one of the things is me habits, the power of habits. Before I go to bed at night, I make sure that I'm setting myself up for success in the morning by having everything tidy. So then when I walk into my office, I don't feel a sense of overwhelm, or walk into the kitchen, it's not messy. Right. These are
yeah.
things that help me feel positive about myself, and not feeling that sense of pressure in a reactive space, which causes me a lot of anxiety. So that's another way. Another thing that I have realized is the just planning and taking the time to plan. Right. I had a boss that said proper planning prevents poor performance, the 5 Ps. So if you think about going on a trip, there's anxiety if you don't plan out ahead to allocate for time to go to the airport. I'm literally the dude who used to, get every cent out of his TSA pre-pass because, I would just barely be getting in there 20, 30 minutes before, takeoff. That's unnecessary, right? If I can properly allocate for the time that it's going to take, pack my stuff ahead of time, right? I know I've got the trip coming up, allocate for traffic, plan for these other things. If it's a report for work or a big presentation, right? Go ahead and add buffer in, add distraction time. Know that things are not going to go as you would anticipate. You're going to get an email, or someone's going to have a demand for you that you didn't have on your plate that week, that's going to inevitably cause things to be pushed back. And so those are tools that have helped me better deal with the anxiety by not putting myself in situations that cause that anxiety for me.
Mm,
I think on the physical side, going for runs, just being out in nature and hiking is really important. And hacking back my own attention. I think that our brains were not really designed to have a lot of the stimuli that we have. So many 13 different browser tabs and open, and unread messages and email and Slack and text, right? And so that can feel a sense of overwhelm as well. So realizing, hey, I'm going to get to these things, but here's the proper context in which I'm going to get to them. I can't multitask. I can't get all this stuff done at once. Let me prioritize the 2 or 3 things that I want to get done. And I would actually say, for me, learning a lot of anxiety came from a sense of overwhelm, and
mm,
overwhelm can come from improper scoping.
mm,
And what I mean by that is, if on my list of tasks for a given day, I have 10 things that are there, but realistically, I may not be able to get all 10 of those done. I'm treating that task list like it's a binary event. Either I got all 10 done, or I didn't, in my head. And I'm not giving myself any credit for the 6 or 7 that I actually did get done. So instead, one of those things that I've moved for is just moving to getting what the most top 3 important things to get done that day. And so once I get those 3 done, I feel a sense of reward and progress for getting those 3 knocked out. And then I can go find the next 3 things to get done. So scoping appropriately, knowing that certain things, is this a 2-hour task?
mm.
Or is this actually a 4-hour task? And in your ideal world of being completely focused and having all your resources and being purely in state, you could maybe knock it out in 2 hours, but you really should allocate 4 hours to it. So those are the type of things that I've been more implementing to help deal with it.
Power of habits is one I certainly can 110% relate with. The challenge for me that complicated the power of habits is accountability.
Mm,
It's really easy to say, I want to go on a run every day. And I relate with that too. Exercise. If I didn't have exercise, I would not be able to realize my anxiety asset. That's one of my key sort of drivers to keeping my asset alive and healthy. A tool that I help keep my power of habits is called Streaks. It's an app. I was
Streaks.
reading Streaks, yes,
Cool.
Streaks. It's an app. Bobby Bones, who's a country radio personality host, in his book, Fail Until You Don't, introduced this app to me when I read it. He's the youngest inductee to the Country Music Hall of Fame. And, learn something from this guy that's come from not too much. Very, very, very modest background from the South. And the Streaks app is amazing because it helps you track habits that you're trying to form and really make them habits, right? I don't think I would call something a habit until I've done it. Let's define, what does that habit mean? Does it mean you've done it 7 days straight, 30 days straight, 60? You don't put a number behind it. It could just be a task. It could just be a to-do list.
It's when it becomes automatic, right? When your body doesn't
Yes,
feel right if you don't do it.
exactly.
It's your automatic go-to response.
How I define habit now that I use the Streaks as part of sort of the human plus machine for myself, right? The human aspect is me, but I need a technology, need a machine to help me keep myself accountable. How I know I've accomplished a habit is when I don't have to update that streak on a daily basis in the app. So if you open up my Streaks app, I've got a multivitamin, how many days I've been sober, because not that I excessively drink, but that's one of those things that I know over the years, alcohol triggered my anxiety day after day of, things like that. Exercise. So tracking all those habits to really go from task to a habit, and, keeping myself accountable for it.
Got it. So the Streaks app, we'll include a link there. Folks, check that out. Sounds like this guy, Bobby Bones, has a good story too as well. We may want to check out that book. What is that called again?
Fail Until You Don't.
Fail Until You Don't. I love that title. And yeah, I'll actually stop here and pause and talk about alcohol here, because I feel that alcohol is one of the easiest traps to get into. In America, I feel that we have a really dangerous philosophy and a view perspective of alcohol, because it's so accessible and it has so much marketing behind it that we don't view it as how dangerous it actually is, right? People look at alcohol consumption, it's normalized. People talk about it at work, but they wouldn't talk about any other consumption of any other drug at work, right? You even see people consume it at work. A number of times I've seen, alcohol consumed in the office place, right? And it is a very slippery path for folks, for many people, in dealing with anxiety, because alcohol is a numbing agent and it does its job very well of helping you not feel stress, right? So I actually have not drank since, the beginning of COVID. It's been over a year and 4 months now. And I've found myself to be in a much better place, largely because of that. And realizing that what may have turned in, people will grab a drink just for fun, right? Hey, we're going to brunch. Let's grab a drink. Hey, you got a job promotion. Let's grab a drink. Hey, you lost your job. Let's grab a drink. Hey, you got you're getting engaged. Let's grab a drink. Hey, you guys broke up. Let's grab a drink. And so alcohol is this thing that's woven into our daily lives, and it can lead to, if you're a false coping habit or a false coping mechanism. So that's what I will say this from my own personal experience in seeing that, how much taking the edge off with a glass of, whiskey or beer after work can become a habit that becomes a very negative, spiral. And I would say encourage people to, and there's a lot of folks who are doing this now. I think a lot more, breweries are offering non-alcoholic versions, mocktails at bars and stuff like that, because people are realizing the dangers of alcohol are there. It's really not beneficial for you. Not to be preachy at anybody, but yeah, from an anxiety perspective, that doesn't solve the root problem, right? Like when I think about what's causing the anxiety, if it's me not preparing well, right? It's that initial fight or flight response, right? And you're understanding these certain type of scenarios I'm feeling overwhelmed in, but not understanding why you're feeling that overwhelmed. What are the factors that are contributing to that? Is it poor planning? Is it unrealistic expectations? Is it some mental, limiting beliefs that you have about yourself or about, the scenario? Drinking alcohol doesn't address any of those things. It doesn't encourage any of that introspection. It doesn't, help with any of the reflection. So I will say that for me, a key part of that is like really owning up to doing the work and understanding where the real source of the problem is, and not treating that, focusing energy on that, which is having good habits, going for a run, understanding, the value of physical exercise, lifting some weights, versus treating the symptom, which is the easy way of just grabbing a drink.
Start from within, certainly, and I think that's what I love what you're sharing here. One of the hardest and maybe even worse questions I get when I talk about anxiety as an asset is, well, how do you cope with your anxiety? On the outset, that should be a good question, right? How have I been able to, make anxiety my asset? I tell people in response, what causes you anxiety? Because what works for me isn't going to work for you, right, Jonathan? Jonathan's got amazing, he's really disciplined about alcohol. Why did you get to that point where you realized alcohol is something that you haven't consumed in the last year and a half almost? Before that, you were doing it casually, socially, maybe professionally as well. How did you get to that point? So I think what I tell people is, if you're interested in, I can happily share my story and what I did, but I have a framework in which I really think about how to make anxiety an asset. It's really starting from within. Identify, discover, design, and sustain. That's really the framework for how I think about making anxiety an asset for others, so that one can take an introspective approach that's prescriptive as well, that can help reach those conclusions of, hey, alcohol, it's something that exacerbates my anxiety. For me, caffeine also exacerbates my anxiety. I used to drink coffee every day at work, and I realized, why is my heart palpitating throughout the day? I thought it was just the coffee. I just started to go off of coffee after that, and I realized, okay, like I'm not always having a racing heart in every moment. Where, some situations where, sure, I'm doing public speaking, that could be a little more of a situational sort of moment of anxiety. But in those times where my heart was racing and I was doing something very straightforward, I really took a moment to think about, let me take a step back, what's going on? Let me discover what's going on in this moment, help design something to really fix this situation. In this moment, it was designing around eliminating coffee from my routine and then sustaining that through the app Streaks, checking it every day. I didn't have coffee. That's just like a super quick example story of how, I use that framework of identify, discover, design, and sustain to make anxiety my asset.
Gotcha. Can you say that framework one more time?
Yeah. Identify, discover, design, and sustain. As a consultant, we love frameworks. I'm no clinician, but I'm a passionate mental health advocate, and I want to share what's worked for me. And this is worked for close friends and family of mine as well. So I wouldn't recommend something that hasn't worked for others.
Right. No, that is awesome.
Yeah. What else, man? What's the latest thing causing you anxiety in your life? Let's go from like the conceptual to, more recent things.
Yeah, I've got anxiety about this podcast, right? Like, how do I make sure this is a good episode? And how do I grow the podcast to make sure it's, bring as much resource and value to people as possible, so it has that impact?
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of value in what you're doing. I know there's going to be a lot of people that are going to benefit from this podcast.
Likewise, I love what you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's awesome. There's so many people. I mean, literally, you see the folks in the Olympics recently and the golf circuits, right? Taking breaks for mental health reasons. Whether it's in professional work, there's, I don't know, people are familiar with 996 culture. This is in China. They have many tech companies have a 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6-day a week work schedule, right? As we deal with the globalization, you're no longer just competing locally, you're competing against people So even if it's not an American practice, to keep up with another company, you have to uh, be mindful of what the market is doing, right? So you see the expectations for continuous growth and earnings quarterly, delivering, and when you're already at $1 billion, for you to grow 10% requires you to grow another 100 million, right? Which is a lot harder to do than if you're a $10 million company and you need to only grow $1 million. So you see, working at these larger companies, you have bigger and bigger expectations, bigger goals, to hit, to maintain these growth goals, right? And so anxiety across the world, I think, is something we all feel. We all feel stress. We all feel these things. I can only imagine what, being in a presidential capacity, or a governmental, dealing with all these different crises and multiple different, treaties, et cetera. All these things are real. So there is no escaping anxiety. There's always going to be something, that's going to have your attention and do that. But it's understanding how do you have those actual tools to deal with it that is, the most important thing. So yeah, I appreciate what you're doing, and you sharing your story and all the resources that have been helpful for you to deal with that, because this is something that it trickles down even to younger kids, right? So you went to UC Berkeley, right? One of the top schools in the country, public or private, the top ranked, public school. In high school, you got a 4.41.
Mm-hmm. Don't forget that one.
4
Yeah.
point. It's amazing. Put some respect on it. I would imagine, though, the number of seats at UC Berkeley from when you went in, is pretty much stayed the same, right? They admit the same number of freshmen, but the population of people applying, meaning the admissions rates every year drop further and further,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So to get into the same school that you would have 5, 10 years ago, right, even 20 years ago when someone's parents went, requires a higher level and threshold to even be admitted, right? And this is where you see anxiety trickling down to kids at the high school level, or even, prior to that, even being aware of what they have to do to be competitive in these type of things. And I think there's a healthy amount of tension that people should feel, and amount of, um, effort that needs to go into achieving those things. But also the context of, like, okay, if you put this big decision, whether or not you get into this school or not, right? Where statistically the odds are not in your favor, and you are not in control over all the number of different factors that admissions committee could look at, right? They're choosing things far beyond just your intellectual capability. But are you from this particular state? What is your particular major? Are your parents alumni? Potentially your ethnicity? A whole number of other different factors, because they're trying to get their halo effect for their rankings, to say, we have, this global body of students representing all these different states. And do you play the cello? Well, we already have 2 cello players, so we don't need one. But if you're a Olympic, weightlifter, we'll take that, right? And so my point is, you can put an unnecessarily level high anxiety on you to achieve a goal, or some sort of outcome that may not even be fair to begin with, right? And so putting, I think, the focus on the process, and this is the part that when you hear folks talk about falling in love with the work, trusting the process, and understanding. There's a great quote that says that, regarding confidence. Confidence isn't the belief that people will like me; it's the belief that I'll be okay whether they like me or not. And so, whether or not you had gone to Cal or not, it's believing in yourself and understanding that there's still going to be a great life for you ahead, right? I'm a talented person who's going to work hard, who gets along well with others, who adds value in this world. It's great to maybe go to this university, can help in introductions and a network. But there's people who didn't have any college degree at all that still are wildly successful, right? There's so many other heuristics that matter, in this world beyond just an academic pedigree. And I think if anyone younger is feeling that, or feeling that they have to work in it, I know people will reach out to me, right? They want to work at, one of these brand name FANG companies. and place so much pressure on that and anxiety on the interview process, and then they take that weight on themselves, and then they don't get the outcome that they want. And it's like, hey, you have to understand, here's the things that you can control, and you should judge yourself by that. And here's the things that you can't control, and you shouldn't judge yourself by that. And that luck is a big component to life at all, right? We can't choose our height. We can't choose our parents, the family we're born into. We don't choose what our face looks like. Um, we don't choose the state of the economy. Just so many different factors that can play out. And comparing your day one to somebody else's day 10 inevitably leads to disappointment as well, from the perspective of not having the right context and understanding those things. And if anybody's listened to this who's younger in that's why I would say that a lot of the fear that I had when I was younger came from that perspective, a sense of like lack of abundance, of sense of scarcity, of if I don't have this path, or achieve this by a certain age, then it's not going to come. And then a lot of this is adding anxiety in myself personally that I didn't need to. So that's, I would say, double check those some of those beliefs that you have. Be self-awareness. That's the power of self-awareness, to understand some of those expectations you might have in terms of scoping, that may not even be reasonable, that are adding to that anxiety. Because there literally are people that are committing suicide because they didn't get a job, or because they didn't get into medical school, or didn't get a certain GPA, and that's wild. There's that's wild. There's so, life is it's so much bigger and so much more beautiful, and there's no reason for that.
That's actually a really powerful segue, because tomorrow, September 5th, is the start of National Suicide Prevention Awareness Week in the country. A startling statistic, which I love numbers, amongst adult people ages 10 to 34, suicide is the second leading cause of death.
Wow.
So just reflect on what Jonathan just talked about. And if that's the second leading cause of death today, compounded with the proliferation of social media, living in this pandemic-induced world for, it's only been a year and a half, I'm predicting, if I had a crystal ball, it's going to be another few years at least of ups and downs and waves, delta, sigma, etc. This is, suicide is a area that we want to prevent, of course. Budding young students, professionals, to not get to this point where they want to jump off of their dorm room patio. Something that happened my freshman year at Cal. They actually did that. Took their own life away because they didn't get, maybe it's the right grades. I know it was academically driven.
Right. Nothing is worth that.
It's not. There's also stories in the Bay Area. You're where you are.
Yeah.
There's a high school student, at least this is 4 or 5 years ago, that lost their life by tying themselves up on a train track.
Yep. They're in the peninsula area.
Right.
It's not uncommon.
It's not uncommon, and putting numbers to it, it's a leading cause of death for people, and in that 10 to 34 age range. It's really startling. I think it's even more sad, and that's why I feel even further motivated to be able to evangelize this story, this concept, with others, so that maybe if one person can listen and relate with, and can help potentially grow from where they are, it can prevent, the worst that could potentially happen. So I think, although that's kind of a dreary note, I know we're probably starting to close this podcast, there is a lot of hope there, because with the information age that we're in, there's so many resources that are available. When there are leaders like those that you reference that are coming out with anxiety, Naomi Osaka is boycotting events left and right, and she's a budding professional tennis star. When there are people like that trailblazing for mental health advocacy like never before seen. A generation ago, this could never be done. There is a lot of hope out there because of not only the resources, but also leaders, people that matter are coming out to share their stories. And we need more of that. And I talked about that in one of my blog posts recently, where I featured 3 leaders who are leading the way in mental health because they're sharing their own personal stories with it. Tipper Gore, Lenny Mendonca, former advisor to Gavin Newsom, and Stephen Hayes, a mental health focused VC investor. Those 3 people are doing great work, because what we don't want to do is get to the place of suicide. In that article, what I wrote about was Kate Spade. She was a leader of a company who no one knew on the outside. She had a great career, but on the inside committed suicide because she had a lot of demons, a lot of challenges in her life. And maybe it could have been a different, if this was her now or a decade from now, when stigma is starting to change around mental health, would we still have the brilliant mind of Kate Spade? Would we still have the bright mind of all the students, kids we've lost at the ages of 10 to 34? It's, a lot of rhetorical questions, but I feel there's a lot of hope about where the future is, and I think it's really bright.
Yeah, I believe so as well. I think resources have never been more popular and more available, and technology solutions being more scalable. I think people societally setting a norm for that is really important. So yeah, I'm optimistic as well, and we'll continue to do the work on my side and be there. And it's crazy you mentioned that, because I actually realized, so this whole podcast, I wish I knew. I'm sharing all the things that I wish I knew because I wish I'd know them sooner. It's hopefully that can help somebody else. And a lot of what I would talk about are around careers as well, and jobs, and having the right fit, because I believe how you spend your day is how you spend your life. And we spend the bulk of our waking hours at our careers and jobs. And I think that a lot of, the economy is changing faster than ever. Some folks are, maybe to figure out what they were supposed to be doing by, maybe, right out the gate, they always knew that what they wanted to do. Other folks, maybe they've had, great parents or mentors in their life to help them steer that way. But I know there's a lot of other folks who are struggling, figuring things out, don't know what they want to do. And there's a cost to that, right? Some things you'll only learn through experimentation, but other things you can learn and avoid. And I think being able to pick a job that is a right fit for you, or a career fit for you as early as possible helps make the world a better place. Because if you are in a job that you don't like, you're really not going to be really happy with your life. Your career makes up the bulk of your waking hours. It determines, so much about, who you're spending your time with day to day, how much you earn, what your quality of life is. If you're a consultant and you don't like traveling, for example, that could be a big problem if you're expected to travel a lot. And so my first job out of college, I moved across country, and actually was, I'm very ambitious and young, and I'm in a role where I'm surrounded by folks, 20 plus years average age above me, who didn't share that same ambition, and it wasn't a fast growing, industry. So that inevitably was a bad fit for me. Right. And I remember being in my early 20s, driving and not liking where I was living, not like what I was doing, and thinking about, man, look at this pole right here. I could just drive this car. If I just literally just tilt my wrist a little bit here, a few degrees, I could just probably just go in this. And it's crazy to think like how much better my life is now, and how, weak-minded I was in that sense, that I was actually thinking that. But there's a role that being in the right role, being in the right part, finding your tribe, finding your right community, support that can help you deal with the anxiety inevitably that you have. And so living in a place that you enjoy, having the right peer group, right, having the right environment around you, I think is all very important important for having to deal with the inevitable anxiety and stress that will exist. It's not that it's ever going to go away, but being able to understand that there's nothing worth taking my life, and I'm glad I didn't, because with a few small changes, you can have a very different, outcome and experience. And so it's up to you to take those actions to figure that out, and to take actions to move past fear, move past those mental traps.
Yeah, no, that's a really powerful story. And I mean, thank you for sharing that. First off, it's very vulnerable. And I know it's going to be valuable to those just to potentially relate with and understand that there are other people that have had some challenges in their life. But that's what I want to first say. Reflecting on things that I wish I knew, keeping up with your train of thoughts. That is something that I wish I knew earlier on in my life. Take time in the shower every day. Maybe you shower every couple days. Whenever you do, watch your thoughts as if it was a train passing you by. Listen to them, feel them, really make it palpable. Start to understand those thoughts. Where is the origin of them? How are those thoughts presenting themselves to your mind? As you start to observe your train of thoughts, you can keep up with those train of thoughts. But that is, if there's one simple takeaway, you don't need to get onto your Apple store or the App Store or what have you, download a new app, Streaks app, or what have you, or even go to my website, anxietyasset.com. Go into the shower. I know you're going to do that eventually this week. Keep up with your train of thoughts. That's what I advise you to do if you can take away one thing from today. And I wish I knew that years ago.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate it. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, man. Likewise. It's been a blast having this conversation and catching up with you.
Likewise.